Hey, what's up, Gator Nation? Welcome to the latest Geo Recruiting Show. Zach Abaverdi here with Keith Niebuhr and Corey Bender to preview the second official visit weekend for the Gators in the 2025 cycle. 14 official visitors last weekend. Another 14 official visitors coming this weekend. The Gators loading up on guys coming to campus. We'll get into some of those top guys expected in Gainesville, some things that the Gators need to do to make the most of this visit weekend. And a lot of guys that we can talk about. I'll throw it to you guys. Who do you want to start with, Keith? Who are you most looking forward to this weekend in Gainesville?
Well, first and foremost, it's a much more star-powered official visit weekend than last week. Now, the difference is Florida had a much better shot with a lot of the guys last week. You know, when you bring in guys with higher rankings, that means there's bigger battles to land them. And that's usually the case, and it's the case this week. But I think a couple guys really – I'd say three guys really stand out to me. One is Jalen Wiggins. He's already committed to Florida. He's the one Gators commit that's on the roster for this weekend. But, you know, he was at FSU yesterday for a 7-on-7 camp, yesterday being Wednesday. He's going to officially visit the Knolls in a couple weeks. And so you're thinking, well, what's going on here? Now, he continues to say he's solid, but how much of a push is FSU making? And we're going to get a good vibe on all that this weekend. And how hard is he recruiting? You know, so it's twofold with him, Zach. Is how locked in is he? We think pretty locked in. And how much is he going to recruit? But a second guy and a third guy would be the FSU commit, Solomon Thomas, 5-star offensive lineman. Florida's either running second and third, with LSU being the other school in the mix. So this is a big weekend for Florida to try to catch up to FSU. And then finally, the other guy for me, Ben Hanks Jr., kind of a mystery. You know, obviously, I went to school with his dad at Florida, wore number 11, very good linebacker. And but the thing is, we don't really know two things we don't know, Zach. How hard is Florida on him, and how much is he into Florida? And then the other thing is, where is he on the board? We just don't know. There's so much uncertainty with Florida's cornerbacks board right now. We get into that a little bit later. But so those are really three guys I'm paying close attention to, and I'm sure Corey's got some other ones.
Good deal.
Yeah, Corey, Ben Hanks was one of mine too. It's funny because much of his recruitment, Miami's been the school kind of trending. Even when Florida offered him a while ago, there just never really was that much buzz. The last time he visited was last summer for a camp, so it's been a year since he's been on campus. But when I spoke to him a few weeks ago, he said Florida really doesn't have to do that much to kind of get up towards the top with me. And, you know, and he said Will Harris, he's hitting him up almost every day. And you watch his film, and it's kind of easy to see why he's a top 100 prospect, man. His film is really impressive. So you combine all of that, and I think it makes him even more important of a visitor for this weekend, just based off where that cornerback board stands. Another kid, Hollis Davidson, a tight end who used to be committed to Auburn. Florida was right there at the top for much of his recruitment. I mean, they were kind of right there with Auburn. Now he's back on the market. I put him in my mock class about 2 weeks ago. That was before this past weekend when, Micah Jones and, we had a few other guys on campus too, where Florida might be probably in a better spot for those guys. But I think this weekend could go a long way with Hollis Davidson as well, with Florida planning to take two tight ends. So I think overall, like the guys Keith covered at the top, then, some other guys in kind of that low 4-star, 3-star range that Florida still really likes. So it's going to be an interesting weekend to see how it all plays out.
And Zach, if I can mention one more guy, Zach,
no doubt,
kind of a mystery recruit in a sense that it's Miles Johnson. He's a 3-star linebacker from the state of Alabama, and he's been committed to Alabama since last fall. But he committed to the old staff at Alabama, not the new staff. Communication with the Tide apparently isn't as consistent as it is with Florida. He also has, only that we know of, this official visit scheduled, and at least as of we're writing this, no known official visit set. I'm sure as we say this, it'll change. But as of right now, we don't even think he's got an official visit scheduled to Alabama. So what's going on there? How high is he on the board? We think Florida may only take a couple linebackers. Would they take him if he wanted in? Would he flip if Florida wanted him? There's a lot going on there. Sometimes you got to read between the lines, man. I mean, his communication with Alabama, apparently, according to our people, boots on the ground in Tuscaloosa, say it's not that strong right now. So if Florida pushes, that's certainly somebody to watch.
And one more thing too, Zach, just to kind of piggyback off that, I was talking to someone yesterday too with Miles Johnson, and I was told he's been kind of hurt, most of this year, and the new Alabama staff hasn't seen him work out, and that's one thing they kind of wanted to see from him, kind of see up close what kind of player he is. And not going to say, injury doesn't help any school, but as far as Florida's chances, they really want him. we're approaching summer. His season's about to start. Is there enough time to kind of go watch him and, especially with his OV starting tomorrow. So that's another thing to keep in mind as far as the on-field eval part.
Now, we'll start digging into some of these visitors a little bit more and what these trips mean. But I do want to ask you guys, there's a lot of legacy flavor in this class. Had, two legacies, obviously, that we've been following a lot at the receiver position in Ingram and Brown, but another one coming this weekend in Banks. What do you guys think of that in this cycle? I mean, legacies are always interesting recruitments to follow. It seems like they're pretty heavy in this cycle, maybe more than usual. How many legacies are there total?
Well,
I believe three. I think the three that stick. No, keep going, Keith.
No, I'm thinking in my head here while you're talking. Go ahead, Corey. I think there is three, but there was a fourth. But I think Florida's kind of eased off Brandon Brown, who was a legacy too. I'm trying to think.
You're right. Yeah, Brandon Brown was the fourth, and Florida really kind of hasn't been that involved for a while now. I mean, like you said, Keith, I think they kind of cooled on him a little bit. But I think, like you said, it's the main ones. Vernell Brown, obviously you have Ben Hanks, and then you obviously have Ingram, and all three of those guys are highly rated. Ingram's more of the projection type, so his recruitment's not as crowded as the other two. But it's just one of those years, man. It just shows how talented and how deep the state of Florida is, and it also shows how old we're getting at the same time.
Which legacy do you guys feel like might be the hardest for Florida to land in this class?
Well,
Ben Hanks.
You think so?
Probably. Right now, I think. I mean, after his OV, probably. I mean, it's in Ingram. I think we all feel like Florida's positioned the best for him just going into the OV. Vernell Brown. I mean, it's tough. Vernell Brown's a tough one to read, man. I feel like Florida. I think Keith did too. We both put him in our mock class. Florida's kind of been surging back with him, but it's still his OVs are going to play a big factor in that. But probably right now, I go Ben Hanks.
So CJ Ingram is being recruited as a receiver athlete. And, he played quarterback in high school and has played quarterback in high school and won state titles. And, Zach, I think you've been hearing that maybe Florida's going to give him a look at quarterback. He's always said that they would, or he has said they've told him they would. So that's interesting. I think at the end of the day, when you look at his offer sheet, I mean, the one offer that stands out is Florida. And obviously, Vernell Brown's got offers from every big program in the country. We just feel like at the end of the day, everybody in his family has played at Florida. I mean, there a half dozen guys in his family played college football and all played for the Gators. His dad, obviously Vernell Brown, was a very good player for Urban Meyer's teams, I guess Ron Zook's teams too.
The face of Florida football.
That's right. His granddad, Vernell Brown, was, I think, a defensive back in the early 80s, just as Florida was getting really good. He had an uncle, John L. Brown, that was Florida's leading rusher, I think, in 1979, who I want to say was like one of the top recruits in the country coming out of high school.
Wow.
And so at the end of the day, man, and I know you feel the same way, Zach, it's going to be hard for him to say no to Florida, right?
Sure.
But then,
I think if Florida didn't get him, that'd be the one that would hurt Florida fans the most.
Especially with all due respect to your buddy Vernell, his father, who I love too. I think this guy's the best one in the family. Okay. I think the youngest, he is just smooth. He's a stud receiver. But, Ben Hanks is interesting, and is his dad going to visit with him this weekend? Right? His dad, if a lot of people may recall this and some may not, but when they gave his dad the number 11 back in the early 90s at Florida, that number hadn't been used in years and years and years. Spurrier, of all people, Steve Spurrier, unretired, 2 numbers, that one and, Scott Brantley's number.
Yep.
I remember I got that mixed up back in the day. It still haunts me, one of those fact errors you put in. I got Scott Brantley mixed up, who I became friendly with years later. Scott Brantley mixed up with Glenn Cameron, and it to this day haunts me. But that was a big deal to give Ben Hanks that number, and then he went on to have an outstanding career for Florida. So is he going to join his son? How emotional is that going to be? His son seeing him.
Yeah.
Florida.
Imagine bringing them to Spurrier's, right?
I don't think that's right, Zach. And I don't think Steve Spurrier was at the recruit dinner last weekend. Now, sometimes they mix it up. Sometimes it's at Spurrier. Sometimes it's at the O'Connell Center. I don't have the schedule yet, but that's right. What if Steve Spurrier? So there's all these things that could make this a lot more emotional of a deal than Ben Hanks Jr. ever thought it would be.
And also, too, Zach, just to add, his sister graduated from Florida, too. So there's some familiarity there. So his sister graduated. When I talked to him a few weeks ago, and I said, hey, are they in your ear recruiting you? Are they kind of pushing? He said, no, not at all. He said they'll say a few things here and there. Florida has a good game, but it's not too much pressure for him to go to Florida. But I think this weekend will determine it all. Like you said, he hasn't been to campus in a year, so it's been a while. And, I've talked to him a good amount of times, and most of the time after I talk to him, I kind of leave thinking, Florida has a long way to go here. But this last time, you could tell, Will Harris is doing a good job from afar. They're doing what they can. But I still think right now, Miami, you have to view them as a team to beat, I think, as of right now.
Zach, when you look at the cornerback board, though, and I think Corey agrees with me, it's the most murky of every position group. Like, we really don't know who their clear-cut top guys are other than DJ Pickett, right? The five-star from Zephyr Hills, who, quite frankly, isn't leaning Florida right now. And Florida's got a lot of work to do there. Now he's going to officially visit for the Miami game August 31st. But they're behind. Look, everybody knows this. So they got some work to do, and he wants to see them win. But beyond that, it's really murky. It's cloudy. We don't really know who their top guys are. So, hey, it sounds great. Ben Hanks is coming to town. He's a top 100 or whatever recruit. He's I'm looking at his ranking right now, top 100 national recruit. But we really don't know, or at least I don't. Corey may have some more knowledge here, exactly where he sits on the board, how hard they're going to push, et cetera. So there's a lot of unknowns with his recruitment. That's probably why it's maybe makes him one of the 2 or 3 most interesting guys coming in this weekend. But he's a long and lean cornerback, fantastic young guy to talk to. And it's always cool when you see, I know everybody listening, and Zach, you're smiling, to see these guys that we grew up watching, to see their kids play in a way, you start feeling a little older. But the other part of that is it's really cool when you're happy for these guys. I mean, Zach, you go back, I think you're friends. I think you've told me with Vernell Brown's father, and so you go back a ways with them. So it's exciting for us too, just to be able to write and talk about these guys, quite frankly, and to see them, the dads that we know all excited about this. It's a blast, man. That's one of the best parts of the job, quite frankly.
Yeah, man. You talk about Cornelius Ingram, Vernell Brown, and Ben Hanks, man. Don't get better than guys like that.
Cornelius Ingram, fantastic dude, man.
Oh, really, man, the best. All right, well, let's dig into this offensive line group that we got coming in. The Gators don't have an offensive lineman committed yet for the 2025 class. They loaded up on offensive linemen in the 24 cycle, bunch of high school recruits, a bunch of transfers, but they've got some guys coming in this weekend, 3 interior offensive linemen, as well as an offensive tackle. Obviously, Solomon Thomas is the headliner, but I imagine each one of these guys have some importance to this staff. What do y'all think about this O-line group coming in and the importance of trying to get some of these guys on board?
Yeah, no, I think overall that's a position group I feel like that kind of has a lot of work to do, man. I think kind of like the cornerback board, you look at Florida's offensive line board, especially now after the reclassification. Florida's position well, a good amount of them, but not at the top. John Mills is one coming from California, who I think Texas is probably leading for right now. Florida maybe at number 2, but I think there's a good gap between those. Solomon Thomas is obviously committed to Florida State, but what I will say with his recruitment, I know Florida's been involved for almost 2 years. That commitment to FSU is strong, but I know in recent months, Florida's kind of made more of an impression. They're definitely kind of making their presence felt with him. Proximity is a big thing. Obviously he even says it's so easy just to get from Jacksonville to Gainesville, and it's just effortless. And then guys like Grayson Howard, Roger Kearney, guys that he knew growing up, through Little League over in the Jacksonville area, that just familiar faces made that kind of enhance that comfort level, kind of bring it up a little bit more. So I think it's obviously a big opportunity for Florida. They need to kind of make a statement with these offensive linemen. And that's why in my mock class, I didn't include that many because it's so murky as far as where Florida stands. I also think the portal will be another big one for them. So I think obviously Solomon Thomas, that's a big one. Taryn Hedrick from Naples, that's one I put him in my mock class early on, but it was more of a projection. He's a kid down in Naples and moved down from Missouri. Good looking athlete, offensive tackle. I think, he has about 4 or 5 visits this summer, but I think this Florida one could actually go really well. And I think Florida can maybe pull into the driver's seat this weekend.
Good stuff.
I'm looking at a couple of these guys. I mean, Solomon Thomas, I do think Florida's got a shot, probably in that 30 to 40% range. Micah DuBose is going to be a tough one. He's at times been listed as a tackle, at times as an inside guy, but LSU Bama battle, and he's from Mobile. He's like almost halfway between those 2 schools. This is going to be a real battle between them. He's visited Florida earlier this year, and after that visit, they secured an official. So they did get a shot in the arm after that visit. They're going to need another one this time. The good news is either way, Florida's going to know where it sits with this visit with Micah DuBose. They're either going to get good vibes, like, hey, let's keep recruiting this guy, maybe, or they're going to be like, no chance. Now we can focus on the other guys that they need to focus on. The third guy, John Mills, some people, or a third guy, John Mills, the inside offensive lineman from Palo Alto, California, out in that area. A lot of people think he's a strong Texas lean. There's even been some chatter that maybe he's already told Texas he's coming. So that's something to watch. So again, to me, when you really factor all these things in, of the 4 offensive linemen, the 2 to watch are Solomon Thomas to see how much of a boost Florida can get, and then Taryn Hedrick, who Corey just mentioned from down in Naples, because that's a guy not many people have talked about. When you look at his official visit list, his official visit schedule, the Florida visit kind of does stand out some. Like you're not like, I hate to say this, but you're not like there's not an Ohio State or Texas. You know what I mean? Like it feels like where Florida is right now, trying to build this program up, that one's more doable than maybe a Micah DeVos. Maybe I'm wrong there, and I know that's not what some people want to hear, but sometimes you have to face the facts here, right?
Sure.
So those are the 2 guys I'm watching.
Good stuff. Now, obviously, Solomon Thomas is not the only recruit committed to another school that the Gators are trying to flip. 2 guys committed to schools in the state of Alabama from the SEC that the Gators are hosting. Miles Johnson at the linebacker spot and Folk at the edge position. Where do the Gators stand with them and trying to flip those 2 guys coming into this trip?
I'll start this one, Corey, if you want. Jacaleb Falk's interesting because it's a good-looking prospect. 6'3.5", 225 from a little town, tiny town south of Montgomery, Highland home, committed to Auburn, but he's taken a lot of official visits. So if you're looking at that, you're thinking, man, I don't know. Hey, look, this guy seems pretty open, and maybe he is. And there is chatter out there that Florida may have a surprise in store this cycle. They think they do. It's sort of gotten out there that people on the Florida staff think there's a surprise. Of course, I don't know who the hell that is. I don't know who the surprise is going to be. So I keep thinking maybe this is just nothing, or maybe it's something. This would classify as a surprise because if you could get him, his brother plays for Auburn, and he doesn't just play for Auburn. Keldrick Falk is maybe Auburn's best young player. Okay, maybe outside of Cam Coleman, he's one of the 2 or 3 best young players there. So small town, within an hour or so of Auburn.
Family ties.
Yes, it feels like it's going to be a tough one. In fact, Florida State had his brother committed, had his brother, the stud at Auburn now, committed right up until basically signing day. And he took an official visit to FSU the last weekend and told reporters as he left Tallahassee, that's it, I'm done with visits. And then he drove straight to Auburn. And flipped. And so and they're good. It's a good family. But once he flipped, that really tilted a lot of things in their favor with Jacaleb too. He really looks up to his older brother. We know that.
Sure.
But he likes Florida. He does. And he's been there many times. And maybe, just maybe, he says, I want to chart my own course. I want to, and I don't think Florida would be bringing him in if they didn't think there was at least a glimmer of hope. These are smart people over there. Okay. I know they haven't won a ton of games yet, but they're no dummies over at Gators headquarters. They're not bringing in a guy just to bring in a guy. They're bringing in a guy because they feel like if they bring him in, they feel like, you know what, here's why there's a chance. So we'll see. He likes Florida a lot. Miles Johnson, Corey, I'll let you get into that one.
Yeah, Miles Johnson, I mean, we'll just touch on it again real quick. I think Florida probably has the best shot of flipping him. As Keith was saying at the top, I think Florida right now is the only OV scheduled on his, for right now. Ole Miss and LSU were 2 other schools he previously mentioned, but Florida's been the school pushing the hardest. And I know he mentioned Ron Roberts as a coach that reaches out to him weekly. They break down his personal film from the spring, and that's something that really impressed him. So I think this weekend will probably go a long way in terms of, Florida can flip him. And obviously, like we mentioned before, Alabama's committed to Alabama. He's an in-state kid, but communication isn't the best with them right now. And a lot of it's because they're still evaluating him. He's been on the sidelines a little bit injured. But yeah, I think overall with him, and one thing about Jacaleb Falk I'll mention too, when he visited Florida early on, it'd been about 2 or 3 times. And I know we spoke to him. Florida at the time was probably a top 3 option for him. I mean, there was a lot of familiarity, but, Patrick Toney and Jamar Chaney were the 2 coaches he used to rave about. And that was a while ago now when those guys were there. So I think that's going to be the biggest hiccup on Florida's side is the relationship building part. Obviously, Ron Roberts, that's a familiar face, right? Coming from Auburn, that helps a little bit. But in past, if you kind of read why Florida was at the top two for a while of those personal connections, we'll see. We'll see if they can generate some kind of new momentum with some new guys in town on the staff. But yeah, he's kind of one of the guys. I don't think Florida has a real good shot, but I could be wrong. We'll see how it all plays out.
Now, obviously, the Gators loaded up last weekend on receivers coming to town for official visits, and they got 2 more coming this weekend. Caleb Cunningham and Cortez Mills. Caleb Cunningham, a 5-star prospect and one of several top targets for the Gators at that spot. Where does Florida stand with these 2 guys coming in and their likelihood of joining them to the class?
Well, how about I talk about Cunningham? How about I do that one, Corey? You're more familiar with Mills. Caleb Cunningham's from Ackerman, Mississippi, which is like within 30 minutes of Starkville. So Mississippi State's in it. Alabama is only, 90 minutes from Starkville. So they're going to be in it. And then he officially visited Auburn last weekend and left and told everybody, hey, they're my new number 1. So to me, those would be the 3 schools to watch right now. Now, he's visited Florida 3 times in the past, and he was there for the spring game. He said for months he was going to come, and you're thinking, oh, come on, this is going to be one of those deals where a guy from Mississippi doesn't make it. He showed up, and he had a lot of family with him. He likes it at Florida. He's got this deal where he told me that he'll go somewhere within a 10-hour drive of home. Florida barely makes that 10-hour radius from the Starkville area. So they're in that. But the most of the chatter is about how proximity to home could be an issue here for Florida. And, so I think I think looking at this realistically, it's a bit of an uphill climb, but he likes Florida and he keeps visiting. Now, I will say this. So you say, okay, he's visited Florida 3 times. That's a good thing. He's visited a lot of schools 3 times. So there's some yin and some yang here, I'm not overly optimistic with this one, not because he doesn't like Florida, not because Florida hasn't done a heck of a job recruiting him. Yes, he does like Florida. Yes, they've done a really good job recruiting him. He really speaks highly of the receivers coach, Billy Gonzalez, and Billy's development of receivers historically at Florida and elsewhere. But at the end of the day, it just feels like it's going to be a tough one. Now, we'll see what he says after this visit. He has a way of making everybody feel like they're going to – every time he goes somewhere, he has a way of telling people, oh, that school, keep an eye on that school. He just is such a good young guy. He never says anything negative about anyone. So it can be a little bit difficult to read, but feels like uphill climb here for Florida.
Yeah, and I think with Cortez Mills, for much of the past year, Florida's been in the top 5. He reaffirmed that to me, over the past couple of weeks. Right now, Miami probably has a slight lead over some of these other schools, but Billy Gonzalez, David Doker, those 2 guys are heavily involved. They keep telling him how much of a priority he is, what the impact he can make at Florida early on. And that's been a big factor with him. And also Billy Napier's involvement in receivers from his past time as assistant coach. That's something that's really kind of caused attention. So he hasn't visited that much. There's been a few times where he's had to visit and had to reschedule. He did come in the spring, or I think it was maybe earlier in the year. Had a great visit, but it wasn't enough to kind of surpass Miami. It was a good showing, but they got to keep getting him on campus. And this weekend, I think, obviously, with a lot of OVs, we'll probably determine where Florida kind of lands with him going into the fall, because I think right now, based on their schedule, Florida has to generate as much momentum as they can with these kids. That way, if they do take a few losses in the fall, hopefully that relationship can kind of soften that blow a little bit. So that's something I'm looking at. And then, just real quick on Caleb Cunningham, too, I feel the same way as Keith does. We usually do our yes, no, or maybe article. I put him in the no category, and some people thought that was kind of overreacting. I just, like he said, he's such a great kid. He's well-traveled. He's taken so many visits. But, he says a lot of great things about Florida. I just don't know if it's going to be enough to kind of put them more at the top. And I think just last weekend he named Auburn his number 1 school on top of that. So it's a tough pull to get these kids out of Mississippi, but we'll see how it plays out.
Now, we mentioned Ben Hanks, another elite DB going to be visiting the Gators this weekend, and Trey McNutt out of the state of Ohio. As you can imagine, the Buckeyes are certainly in the mix for him. 5-star prospect, ranked the number 2 safety in the country, number 22 overall prospect in the 2025 class. This is obviously a big name coming to Gainesville. How do the Gators get in the mix here with him, and what's Will Harris done to kind of put Florida in the picture?
Well, I actually just spent some time with Trey and his mother last week in Nashville at the On3 Elite Series, and I had met both of them down at a 7-on-7 event in Orlando a couple months ago. The mother went to Ohio State, and they live in Ohio. However, I believe he has a sister or somebody in his family just graduated from Vanderbilt, well-educated family. Man, they are doing their homework, okay? And so people keep wondering if he's from Ohio, why is he not considered? And his mom went to Ohio State. Why is he not considered an Ohio State lock? And so that's something that makes you think, well, maybe somebody can get him out of that state. So we're told that I think two of the teams to watch right now would be Oregon, outside of Ohio State, Oregon and Georgia, believe it or not. Georgia's right in there with him as well. And Florida may be in that next tier. Now, he's only visited Florida once. It was on the way to that event in Orlando earlier this year, but they made a strong impression. And new secondary coach Will Harris has really gotten to know him well, visited him at his school, hosted him in Gainesville, did a great job connecting both with Trey and his mother. And so they secured an official visit. You know, they said after that trip, guys, oh, yeah, we're going to officially visit Florida. We just don't know when. And a lot of times Corey can attest to this. And Zach, you did recruiting too. Usually often when they say that, it's never happening, man. They don't have a day. Like, come on. But she said, hey, we're just trying to find a date that works. And they found one that works, and it's going to be this weekend now. So that's interesting. And it makes you think maybe. I mean, small 10, 15% chance, but let's see what they do this weekend, right? NIL, right? You just don't know anymore. You don't want to rule anybody out. I know it sounds like I ruled Florida out with like Jacaleb Falk earlier, but I feel like if Auburn really wants him, they're going to make sure the NIL is comparable to, let's say, Florida, and his brother's there. You got the family, all that stuff. But Trey McNutt, maybe NIL can give Florida an edge. He may look at Florida's secondary where safety's a big need and say, I can come in and start in year one. Maybe I can't do that at these other schools, or the path may be clear. So I think this is one of those ones. I'm actually not as pessimistic as you think I'd be, because I want to see what he says after the visit and how he fits in academically, athletically. What does he think of the depth chart? Again, why hasn't he committed to Ohio State already? Makes you think maybe he's open. So very interesting one there.
Yeah, some guys, they get so exposed to school, they want something new,
Well, and Florida has, I think, I can't remember when it was, but Florida has signed at least one or two really good defensive backs out of Ohio before. And so,
Keywan Ratliff, baby. Keywan Ratliff.
And I believe, and there was one before him from Winton Woods. Maybe, was it Tony George? I'm going to look that up right now. But they had, I got to look this up. But they've done decent in that. I'm really going to have to look this up. Maybe, right? Maybe some kids just want to kind of do their own thing. Yeah. Tony George, DB in the 1990s, was from Cincinnati, Ohio. So who knows? I think Zook might have had a part. Did Zook recruit Ratliff to Florida?
I don't know, man, but I tell you what, that's two guys that wore number one in the secondary that were really good for the Gators from Ohio.
There you go. So
if anything, they should make maybe some highlights of Tony and Keywan for Trey this weekend.
Yeah. Well, could they hire Keywan? We're dealing with the Keywan in this cycle. Could they hire Keywan for this weekend? Could they rent him from the other school he worked at? Yeah. I wasn't going to mention the name of the school he's at. Yeah.
Corey, what are your thoughts on Trey and Florida's chances there with him?
I mean, they're getting OV. They offered early this year. Will Harris, visited a school. That kind of played a part in him. Let me go check out campus. So the personal connections are there. I feel like obviously it's still very early as far as that potential partnership, but I just think it's an uphill battle, man. I just think Florida kind of got into it a little bit later than the other schools. Obviously, OV can change everything, and like he said, he took an unofficial. Just getting him down that first time is always a hard thing to sell, and obviously he did that. So we'll see how it all plays out, man. I know this weekend I feel like Ohio State, he's a legacy there. Obviously, it's a big connection. I don't know what date they have the OV, but that's what I'm leaning towards. Georgia obviously is having so much success year in and year out. I just think it's a hard sell for Florida going into a tough season, but we'll see how it plays out.
You got to shoot for the stars on some guys. So some people are like, well, boy, it doesn't seem like you guys are optimistic about a lot of the guys coming in this weekend. And that's sort of true, but not everybody can be a layup. I mean, you don't, if you build classes with layups only, you win 4 games. All right. So you've got to shoot for the stars on some guys. And then also there's the secondary market, right? You buy a ticket to a game and then from somebody who already bought it, that the secondary market in college football is the transfer portal. So a guy goes somewhere, maybe he goes to Trey McNutt, ends up at Oregon, let's say, doesn't like it out there after a year, but remembers that he had a great relationship with Will Harris at Florida. So, you got to factor in some of those things too, but you got to shoot for the stars. People get mad at the Florida staff. Why aren't they recruiting enough big guys? And then they do. And then some people are like, well, why are we wasting our time with these big guys? You can't have it both ways. All right. They're recruiting like they always do. They aim high at every position. They start at the top and work their way down. And so you're bringing in 3 5-stars this week. And you know what? They might have a chance with one of them more than the others, and that's Solomon Thomas. But you got to try with the others. If you think they're talented and you think they fit your program both on and off the field, you got to give it a go. And you've got plenty of official visits to figure that out. So there you go.
Oh, I was muted there. I said, Keith, you gave me the title for this week's episode. I think they're shooting for the stars.
Shooting for the stars.
You scared me, Zach. I thought you had the internet when you had your thing on mute. I thought the internet went in. Now I'm like, oh man,
we lost the show.
We should just do a whole show where we're just
muting. Two more guys before we get out here. Corey, you've already mentioned them, but the two tight ends. They had two tight ends on campus last weekend. Two more. This is very a position of priority for Russ Callaway, and he's got two more targets coming to Gainesville this weekend.
Yeah, Andrew Olish, a kid out of Pennsylvania. It's an interesting one. I think right now everyone kind of favors Penn State, understandably so. Obviously, they've had a lot of success with tight ends. He's an in-state kid. But Florida, it goes back to how good we think Russ Callaway is as a recruiter, the future he has with that. He even said to me, about a few months ago, he said, hey, I'm going to take an OV to Florida, but I don't want it out yet. I want to wait till Russ Callaway gets my school so I can surprise him. You don't really hear that too often from recruits. You don't hear a kid put that out and wait for a coach to get there in person. So I thought that was key. So the relationship with Russ Callaway is strong. It's another kid that took his first visit in the spring. It was another strong experience. So I think right now it's just getting him more familiar with Florida. I think the relationship with Russ Callaway is great, but showing him just more of Gainesville, showing him the dorms, getting that whole package put together for him, because like I said, it's a kid from Pennsylvania. It's hard to get these kids down the campus, but this will be their second time. So I think right now, Michigan and Alabama are the other schools on the OB schedule, along with Penn State and Florida. I think everyone's kind of trailing Penn State at this point, but Florida has a big opportunity this weekend. And like you said, Zach, another big-time tight end target for if he can capitalize. It's kind of a wait and see for me. I'm going off his recruitment from before just because Florida was in a really good spot. It just depends on that. Auburn commitment only lasted about 3 or 4 months, and Florida's been consistent from the start. So I think right now, Russ Callaway, a few weeks, we don't know. He could have a decision in his hands where a lot of these tight ends are starting to show more and more interest towards Florida. So another big weekend for him.
A good problem to have when you got that many targets on the board. So obviously a really big weekend for the Gators. 14 official visitors their first weekend, 14 official visitors this weekend. They also have a punter visiting from California. Alex, I'm not going to attempt that last name. You guys know it? Go for it, Keith.
Asparuhov. He's from Fresno.
All right.
There you go. Fresno.
Well, we would be remiss if we didn't mention the punter, because as we know,
That's
punters
right.
are people too. And,
where's Nick at? Where's Nick? Is Nick on here?
Nick's currently driving to the upstate. He's probably his third Buc-ee's of the morning already.
We should have brought him in live just from the punter section, just him in the car, just with the seatbelt on, just talking about it. That would have been
just
perfect.
give us his scouting report on Alex. Well, listen, we're looking forward to this weekend. Obviously, as Keith said, they are shooting for the stars. You never know how these things can play out, man. This staff is really good at recruiting. NIL has changed the game, and the Gators have some opportunities to offer as well. So we'll see how it plays out. I do want to encourage everyone that isn't subscribed to Gators Online and is missing all this great recruiting coverage from Keith and Corey. Make sure that you go and use our promo code right now at Gators Online if you are not subscribed. Once you go to sign up, you type in the promo code UF1 and you can get 2 months of premium access for just $1. We had a real-time official visit blog all weekend last weekend. Got 30,000 views. Keith and Corey were updating that thing by the minute. We had stories on all the official visitors, intel and takeaways from Keith and Corey as well. If you guys are recruitniks, you're missing out if you are not subscribed to Gators Online. So make sure that you do that. We'll be back on early next week to recap how the weekend went, and then we'll be back again with a new show next Friday to preview the third weekend in June. So Keith and Corey, appreciate you guys as always for the work, and we'll be back next week with a GO recruiting show. For Corey and Keith, I'm Zach Abaverdi. We'll see you guys then.